Welcome back to Dear Test Kitchen. Today we're gonna make homemade mozzarella. We're gonna use store-bought milk and turn it into fresh curd, and then we're gonna use store-bought curd, show how to stretch it, shape it, and turn that into mozzarella. In this video, you'll notice me and my wife Elena wearing two different outfits. That's just because we split up the cheese making into 2 different days. Also, we shot this in New York, summertime, when the tomatoes were beautiful. We used those to make a caprese salad with the mozzarella that we stretched. Stick around to the end, we'll show you that caprese.
We're gonna try 2 different types of milk to show what could happen with your curd.
And this is the milk that you would recommend to home cooks if they wanted to make a nice curd.
Yeah, you wanna go as local as possible, which usually is gonna mean as fresh as possible. So this milk over here by you that we're using is vat pasteurized. And there's different ways to pasteurize milk. Some are more aggressive than others. And vat pasteurization is what cheesemakers use. It's the gentler way. You're still bringing it up to the legal pasteurized temp, but it's a gentler way to do it.
So
I'm
how
curious,
did you know?
On the very front of
Vat
this milk, it
pasteurized.
says in very small type, vat pasteurized.
Very cool.
Now that's pretty unusual. So we also have another milk here that's just pasteurized. It's not ultra pasteurized because with ultra pasteurized, it's too hot. It's gonna be really, really hard to get a curd. But this one is local, it's really fresh, so it should work too. My guess, my theory is that we're gonna get a great curd from the vat pasteurized, also local milk, and probably a good curd from this one.
Let's make some cheese.
Yeah. So what we've got here and what you want to have at home, and this is obviously duplicate because we're doing 2 different types of milk.
Right.
But at home you want to have basically something that you can use as a hot water bath. We're going to pour our milk into these pots, but around them we're going to be managing sort of the heating of the milk using hot water and cool water that we're going to pour around the pots. We're going to bring the milk up to temperature, add things, hold it, bring it down. It requires a little bit of maneuvering, but with a good thermometer it works. So as you're pouring the hot water in the water bath, you want to make sure to stir the milk so that it's getting heated thoroughly and evenly. So right now we're at about 60 degrees.
This seems like a lot of trouble. What would happen if we just put the pot of milk directly on the stove and tried to heat it up?
Really good question. So the whole process of cheese making is something that is sort of a gentle process. Even though you're doing a dramatic thing, you're changing milk from liquid to solid, you need to be gentle as much as possible. So if you have a direct heat source right underneath your pot of milk, it's gonna be really intense for the milk that's right above the flame.
Right, even if it's on low heat.
Even if it's on low heat.
The heat that's directly touching the pot.
And you actually don't want to raise the temperature too quickly is the other thing.
Right.
I mean, just at every turn, the gentler and less aggressive you can be with the milk, the better your cheese making is going to be.
So this process requires true patience, I guess.
Yeah, in a way it's sort of like bread baking in that sense, where it's like you're gently doing things and you're waiting and you know, it's a little more hands-on as we get these first ingredients in here, but.
Now we poured just sort of 1 pitcher full of hot water.
And it's already gone up about 7 degrees.
Yeah, and that didn't take that long.
You could say it was too fast.
Interesting.
Okay, so now we're gonna prepare our 2 ingredients that we're gonna be adding to the milk.
Right. Making mozzarella, the true food ingredients are just milk, citric acid, and rennet.
Yeah.
And then the rest is like time and temperature.
Correct. And the milk is, you know, you're starting with that. That's the big one. That's gonna impact the flavor of the cheese the most. But the citric acid and the rennet are gonna help us to make a good curd if you're making it from milk, and actually make the milk into cheese. So what we're gonna do is dilute both of them in bottled water. You want non-chlorinated water, which means you really shouldn't use your tap water. Tap water is gonna be chlorinated, it's gonna have chemicals in it, and they will interfere with what we're trying to do to the milk. So we're just gonna dilute 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid in about 1/4 cup. You could use 1/2 cup, it doesn't really matter. And then we're also gonna do 1/4 cup and dilute 1/4 of a rennet tablet.
Now you were doing some experimenting at home. You prefer rennet tablets to liquid rennet.
Liquid rennet, yeah. So you'll see that when you go to buy cheese-making supplies for home cheese-making, there are multiple options. There's liquid rennet and there are rennet tablets. The tablets kind of come looking like this.
Yeah.
Like pills. And they have nice little break marks into quarters because that's usually 1/4 a tablet will make cheese from 1 gallon of milk.
Right. Now where do you buy these things?
So I really like New England Cheesemaking Supply Company. And you can get all kinds of ingredients, and it's a great resource too.
Great.
So the good thing to know and be prepared for with the rennet tablets is that they don't fully dissolve.
Okay.
They'll break apart, but you'll see like a little powdery
And
bit
that's
in
okay.
here. It's totally fine. Well, that's really all you need.
All right, so we did it, 86 degrees.
Yeah, 86. Now the trick is, you know, it's gonna keep climbing a little bit. So what we're gonna do is, we're gonna do our next step, which is to add the citric acid, and then we're gonna pour a little bit of cool water
Into
in the
the
water
water
bath
bath.
just to hold it. We don't
Right.
wanna cool it down necessarily, but we don't want it to keep climbing.
Right.
So I'm gonna add the citric acid, and you can see I'm kind of pouring through the spoon, which is a nice little trick. And then I'm just gonna kind of like thoroughly mix this up. I'm gonna mix with an up and down motion.
You pour it through the slotted spoon just so it
Just kind of dissipates it. Yeah, it's like, it's also just kind of a habit.
You were saying that you think of cheese making more as like a at-home meditative kind of a thing.
Especially these steps, like when we make when we're actually stretching mozz,
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun to do that with other people.
Right.
So now I'm gonna set a timer for about 10 minutes.
So our milk's been sitting for about 10-15 minutes.
Yeah.
With the citric acid at 86 degrees. Next step is we're gonna raise the temperature of the milk up to 90 degrees and then
Yep.
add our rennet.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do.
So another sort of slow, patient process, raising the temperature of the milk from 86 to 90.
Yeah, and it's only 4 degrees, but it can make a difference. And it's important to take those 2 steps because if we added the citric acid when it was a bit higher, it might have a more dramatic effect, which we actually don't want in that step. So that's why we're doing it more delicately. We added the citric acid a little bit lower at 86, and we're gonna sort of gently bring it up to 90, then do the dramatic addition of rennet.
Okay, so the milk's at 90 degrees. Now we're adding, what, like a 1/4 tablet of rennet diluted in water?
Yes, this is the ingredient that's really gonna help make the curd. So I'm gonna pour it through the spoon. Now sometimes there'll be like a little residue, and so then I just get a little bit of the milk in the bowl and put it back in. Just clear out the bowl, make sure we got all the rennet. And then here, I'm actually gonna take a full minute to really, really try to stir as best as I can.
Now you have a special stirring technique, right? You do this up and down thing?
I do this up and down thing. So normally you're stirring, you know, in more of a circular motion, and I'm really going in a circle around the pot, but up and down, touching the very bottom with the spoon and bringing it all the way up. And that's just because the rennet, you really, really need it to touch every aspect of the milk. You wanna stir it in as much as possible. But this is good, and you really won't see anything happen right away with the rennet. Although it does work fast. I mean, 20 minutes, we should have a curd, which is pretty fast.
Yeah. Do we need to worry about the temperature at all? It should stay right around 90 degrees?
At this point, it should hold itself.
So we added the rennet. It sat for about 20 minutes,
Closer to 30, actually.
20, 30 minutes.
Yeah. With rennet, the longer you can give it, sometimes the better the curd will be.
Now, I can see a difference between these 2 curds.
Yeah, me too.
The vat pasteurized milk looks smoother.
It's more like a custard or like a dessert custard in a way.
Yeah, it looks almost like a panna cotta kind of texture. Now this looks a little crumblier, I would say.
Right, it has more of that like ricotta textured look to it.
And you were sort of expecting that.
Yeah, I mean, I knew
the
that
vat pasteurized is like-
vat pasteurized milk is like cheesemaker grade milk
Okay.
in a way. So that's like the best you're gonna get.
Right.
And especially if you're getting it fresh from a farmer at your farmer's market, that's the best.
Yeah.
Now this milk was still local, pretty fresh,
Yeah.
good quality, not high temperature pasteurized, still gentler,
Right.
but not vat pasteurized. So a little more processed, a little more handled. There's a little test you can do because it may benefit from another 10 minutes of rest. And so one little test before you dive in and start cutting all the curd is to just use your thermometer and sort of poke it in an inch or two and drag it across. Now what you're looking
sort of
for,
soft.
yeah, this is pretty soft. What you want to have happen is like a clear line to be there and for the curd to not knit back over
I see.
where you've done it. So let's try it on this one now.
Yeah.
And this one actually, it's funny, I had checked the temp while it was setting, and so you can see that there already is kind of an opening. But let's see this. Now that's interesting. It's still knit back a little bit, but it's still, this one is a clearer line.
Right, I can see now the line where the whey.
It didn't fully knit back. To me also, there's a feeling in my hand where I felt that this one is a little firmer, and that one felt a little softer.
Why don't we cut the firmer one?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so we're gonna cut it and basically do perpendicular cuts across to make kind of a crosshatch.
Why cut the curd?
So we're gonna cut the curd because we want to expel more of that liquid.
I see.
And by cutting the curd, you create an opportunity, more surface area for the liquid to release.
So after cutting it, the curd should get even a little bit more firm.
Yes, so from here on out, our cheese-making endeavor, the goal is to separate as much water from the solids as possible.
I see.
So this is looking good.
Cutting the curd.
Yeah, it also happens to be the name of the podcast that I host. All about cheese. You don't have to be too precious about this, but you want to aim for uniform shape.
If you were gonna use this curd to make mozzarella, what's the next step after cutting it into cubes?
So another way to firm up the curd, after letting it rest for a few minutes, which is what I would do first, is to bring the water bath up kind of dramatically to like 110 degrees.
Wow.
And by heating the curd after it's been cut, you're gonna expel even more water, and that's gonna firm it up even more. There's one more cut we need to do.
Okay.
So we've done the perpendicular cut, but if you think of how this curd is, right now we have long sort of
How tall do you
stacks.
think it is?
Yeah, it's like about that tall. That's about as tall as the pot. So what we want to do is try to get in there and cut some angular cuts to kind of cross-cut those tall stacks.
Tricky. You're gonna try and cut it.
It is tricky, and this is just where you gotta visualize in your mind what you're doing. So now I've done those.
Yeah.
We'll rotate it.
This looks great.
So as we're cutting this too, you're seeing that the curd is really staying custardy.
Yeah.
So at this point, it's still a bit delicate.
Yes.
But we've just kind of shocked it by
Right.
cutting it. So again, we want to just think about being gentle, but we're going to bring the temperature of the water bath up. It's going to firm the curd. We're going to let it rest more, and then you'll be able to make mozz from this. We've got our store-bought curd.
Yeah.
Now,
Solid.
super important shortcut. No shame in doing this. The store-bought curd has done the hard steps for you, and so you know that this curd is not going to fall apart. It's not going to, have like a really small yield. Like this is about the final amount of mozzarella we're going to make, and we can count on that.
Right. Whereas if you're working with like a gallon of liquid milk, by the time you make a curd, by the time you stretch it out,
Might be a pound, 2 pounds if you're lucky.
but it's a fun experience.
It is, and that's why we did it.
Yeah.
Like I think doing it is really exciting, especially just like seeing it go from liquid milk to final cheese, even if all you get is a little ball of mozzarella.
Right.
Okay, so store-bought curd, where to get it though? This isn't like the type of cheese that you're finding on the grocery store shelves. The best advice I can give to folks, from all over is, first of all, if there's someone who makes fresh mozzarella in your community, they probably have mozzarella curd that they might be willing to sell you. So that would be my first choice. Second choice is you could look online. There's some specialty cheese retailers that do ship fresh curd. DeBruno Brothers out of Philadelphia is one. That I know they've got it on their site, so that's a good way to look. And then just even a larger specialty store, even if you're not sure if they're making their own curd, they might be able to order it for you. So just ask the buyer, you never know. Okay, so we've got our curd, we're ready for our next steps, but first, I think it's important to get the lay of the land because with cheese making, as you've seen, it's like fast action and then wait.
Right.
So what we're gonna do first, which I think would be smart, is to prepare our final brine. So like we wanna put in this bowl water and salt to our liking, which maybe would be a high amount for us, so that it's ready for once we've stretched the mozzarella and made our balls of mozzarella, we're gonna drop them in there to kind of like fully form and rest.
So that's the final resting place for the mozz.
Yes.
All right.
Well, the final resting place. We're gonna eat it.
All right, before we get too far ahead, let's talk about the tools that we're gonna need while we make this mozz.
Good. First, the knife to cut the curd.
Right.
Important. But any kind of chef's knife works.
Just a long, sharp knife.
Yeah.
Okay.
The wooden spoons are important. I think like 1 or 2 spoons per person. Once we get into like melting the curd a little bit and getting it to the point where we could stretch it, we're gonna use the spoons because ideally we want the water to basically be just a little hotter than we can stand with our hands.
Any other tools we might need?
Well, we have a salt for our brine, and we're using sea salt, I think, right?
Yeah, that's sea salt. But is it important to use sea salt and not any random salt?
We were talking about this, and I think that, any salt would be fine, but I like the flavor of sea salt better. And also, like, the whole spirit of cheese making is really all about keeping the original products as unadulterated as possible, right?
Were they using ocean water originally in the brine, and that's why the tradition of sea salt?
There's an amazing thing where there have been studies where bacteria is found on the rind of cheese that's only found in the bottom of the ocean floor. So it is kind of a thing. People trace that back to using sea salt. All right, so we have one more utensil in front of us, which is the teaspoon, and that's for tasting how salty we make our brine. Let's make sure we like how salty it is.
This is just for your personal preference.
Yeah.
Does it add a layer of flavor to the mozzarella?
It's a very good question. Because I like a prominent salt flavor in my fresh mozzarella, I don't like relying on the salt in the brine solely. So when we are stretching our mozz in a few minutes in the porcelain bowl, then we are going to add salt to it directly. So we're gonna have like salt and salt. All right, let's make the brine. Okay, so we just want enough to cover the mozz that we put in. So we want it to be like fully submerged, which I feel like this is probably good.
Right.
And then let's salt it.
Do cheesemakers like measure this out?
Well, I mean, yes, professional cheesemakers would, because a big thing with cheesemaking is you want to recreate what you're doing. And that is also a good reason to actually measure it out if you're a home cheesemaker. If you're planning to do it again and you want to be precise and you loved, if you made a great batch and you're like, it wasn't that salty, it would be great to know how much salt you used.
You can reflect back. You could say, this batch I used 1 tablespoon and it tasted this way.
Right.
Isn't there a name for that? Professional cheesemakers use something called like a call sheet or something?
A make sheet.
A make sheet.
I like that. You were close.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start cutting this curd into, basically you want like 1/2 inch cubes. So however you want to tackle that.
So you're cutting this into 1/2 inch cubes.
Yeah.
Why 1/2 inch? Why not 2 inches? Why cut it at all?
Right, so the curd is cold, like we just took it out of the fridge.
Right.
And what we're gonna do is start to melt it. We wanna soften it so that the curd all comes together. So by cutting it into small cubes, we're gonna, have more of the surface area of the curd exposed to the hot water that we're gonna pour in the ball.
Right.
And it's interesting, like because the curd is so cold right now, we're going to need to pour 1 sort of round of hot water into the bowl with this curd, and it'll drop the temperature of the water, but warm up the curd. Then we're actually gonna replace it with hotter water again, and then we'll
You're
start
almost
to...
like tempering the curd first, and then the second time is really when you're working.
Totally. So now I'm gonna put our cut curd in this bowl. And I think that if you cut these guys and maybe this piece, that'll be enough for us to make.
For now.
Yeah.
So we were working with 5 pounds total.
Yeah.
We're gonna really work with like 2.5 pounds at a time. That's
Yeah.
like reasonable. You wouldn't, is it like overcrowding the pot in cooking? Like you don't want too much curd in there, it would be hard to work with?
It would just be harder to get the temperature hot enough so that it would start to melt and really come together.
Right.
And you can always just do it in batches. I mean, this is the nice thing about having store-bought curd is that you've got a big chunk that you could save for another day. Now, because it's fresh curd, you don't want to wait too long because it's not like cheese that should be aged too long. But
once you obtain some fresh curd, you want to use it within the next 2 or 3 days, pretty much.
I'd say within like 3 or 4 days total.
Right.
I'm just breaking these apart. So like, you know, they're kind of sticky and squishing together a little bit. I'm breaking them apart so that when we do add the hot water, it's gonna just like coat them. They're all gonna soften. They'll be ready to go. So we're ready. We're gonna pour some hot water in here, get these like warmed up.
Right.
You don't really wanna pour the water like directly on the curd. You wanna pour it on the outside of the bowl. And this goes along with that same spirit that we've been doing the whole time, which is to be gentle with the cheese, to not try to like shock it, to not do very drastic steps. And so we've basically like almost submerged these. I'm fine with that. The water's pretty hot, so they're already starting to melt. Can you see?
Yeah, just
And
a touch.
What we want to do now is just like get them all kind of hanging out in this water bath. And in terms of the temperature of the water, you want it like just simmering. Maybe just right before simmering. So one thing that you want to test at this stage is you want to break open one of the curds and actually touch the very middle of it, the very center. And if you do, and here, try one. I did kind of a small one. Is it cool?
Yeah.
Still cool. So we're not quite there yet. That's just one way to test as you're pouring more and more hot water. Is the curd kind of like ready to be more aggressively stretched? And we maybe, since we didn't pour too much, we could maybe just keep pouring the hot water and we might not have to pour any out. Sometimes if your bowl's getting too full and it's not hot enough, then you have to dump some out. Pour more hot water in there.
So a lot of this is really by feel.
Yeah. And here we've got the spoons and that, like we're still touching the curd and getting in there, but you want the water to get hot, like so hot that it's a little uncomfortable to touch. And then we'll put our gloves on when we're ready to stretch.
If you were someone who made mozzarella every day, is it important for those people to be touching the curd with their bare hands? There's like something there that allows them to...
Well, it is a really sensory experience,
Yeah.
which is the other thing. It's like, I think that professional cheesemakers of any kind are using all of their senses to make cheese. And that's also why people love doing it so much and why people are so passionate about it.
Right.
Because it's like, it truly is like a fully sensory experience. And you could even sort of listen to how the curd kind of squishes up against the side of the bowl and you get some information from that.
Yeah.
Now that the curd has started getting, you know, it's warmed up, it's like melting, it's ready. We can be a little more aggressive pouring the water in. Okay, let's see. Do you want to do some squishing around with the wooden spoon?
Yeah.
I don't want to hog it.
So what am I looking for?
So you're kind of trying to get the curd to knit together. You want it to, and you really want to keep it under the water. It's pretty hot, but I can still tolerate it. And it's not, but we're getting there. I'd say we only need a little more water. Maybe we don't need to dump any out.
It'll ultimately come together as one big clump.
It will start to, and then we're gonna help it. So one thing you could do with your spoon is just kind of like start to bring it together as one. So they start to knit. Yeah, yes, it's happening.
I feel a slight difference with these curds.
Ah, you're having a sensory, you're
Yeah.
getting some sensory information.
I feel like they were disparate and now they're more
yes.
of a unified ball.
Also, I can't, now it's very hot, it's quite hot. So I think we're ready to stretch.
It is hot.
Oh, this is ready. Get your glove. So what I'm gonna do as Josh is testing this is I'm starting to just break these like this big mass of curd up, stretching a little bit because it's so ready. But I'm breaking it up into a few different masses so that we can have a few different balls.
I think this is around 125.
It's quite hot. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're each gonna take a ball of the mozz, and you can see that you still got some curds knitting together. Some of it's looking actually really smooth. And one thing that I would say like people do a lot of the time is overstretch the curd. And the way that you're gonna get a really nice, delicate texture is by kind of like less is more. We're gonna stretch it a little bit, and then we're gonna be finished with it. Because it really doesn't need to be tugged and pulled that much. It's more a combination of a little bit of action and the heat of the water.
So is this the moment where the curds really become mozzarella cheese?
Yeah, this is mozzarella is happening.
This is the moment.
Yeah, this is a big moment. Okay, so what we're gonna do is you're basically now gonna just inch these, we have this mass of curd, and we're gonna just tug it to do gentle stretching. Now this is a lot less exciting than like, if I was gonna like stretch it and wave it around, messy but fun. But what's gonna happen is we're gonna get that smooth texture. You can already see it, like I'm getting a really nice smooth texture here. Here it's a little grainier, and after I've just sort of tugged it a couple times, it's gonna become smooth. How's yours going?
Good.
You feeling the difference as you kind of tug on it?
A little bit.
See how it's grainy in the mass?
I do. I can. It's for me. It's more visual than. You know what? I do feel it a little bit though.
You're sort of, you're squeezing out some moisture, and we're really.
So you're pressing while you're pulling it.
Yeah, sort of squeezing it and pulling it all really gently.
It reminds me of the magic trick when a clown just like keeps pulling that scarf out of their jacket. You're basically taking the ball and trying to extend it.
And this is what it looks like, and you can see it's starting to really stretch. Now, I'm doing that for the camera because you really want to keep it under the water as much as possible. And that's because what you have working on your side here is not just the action that you're doing, but it's what the heat is doing. And when, we talked about with the citric acid when we added that was impacting some of the protein in the milk in a similar way that the rennet is impacting the protein in the milk. The heat of this water and the action that we're taking are also impacting the structure of the milk solids. So it's all kind of like working together in this moment.
So the curd that we started with is actually transforming into something different.
Yeah.
We're not just taking the curd and stretching it to a different shape. We're changing the structure of what it is.
It's true. Okay, now, I've been tugging at mine a little bit more than you.
Yeah.
Yours is looking a little like wide noodle style.
Yeah.
And mine's more spaghetti.
Well, wide noodles is what I make.
I'm happy about that. I'm gonna jump ahead and do the next step because I feel that mine is pretty much ready. And the reason I feel that way is because it's like very smooth. There's no like beating of, there's no like of this curd texture. Sometimes the funny thing that can happen is if you overstretch it, it kind of goes back to the earlier stage in terms of the visuals and how the cheese feels.
Shiny, is that one word?
Shiny is one thing we want here.
Okay.
What you're gonna do, and this is where it's really fun to make mozzarella with a partner, for the salting step, Josh is going to sprinkle salt as I roll up my long spaghetti noodle of mozzarella like a croissant almost. And just delicately sprinkle salt on it as I roll it up.
So this way, there's salt throughout the mozz. It's not just salty on the outside.
Right. See, I had mine out of the water for a while, so it cooled down pretty quickly, which is not what we want, because we're trying to still make this into a cohesive ball.
Is there a sense of urgency a little bit right now? Is this?
Yes, so time really is of the essence. And if you're doing this at home, it's really fun to play around with that, to kind of like explore what happens if I keep stretching this for a while. I mean, what you'll find is that, like I said, less is really more. And I believe that you really don't want to overwork the cheese, but it's fun to play around with that. Now, I'm gonna do a final move, because this does not look like a ball of mozzarella, right? I'm not sure how this final move is gonna go.
Hey, we could always cut and pretend like you did it great the first time.
Well, the reason that I'm not sure is because the cheese cooled down a lot. And you still want it to be pretty melty at this final moment. But what I'm gonna do is stretch the cheese over itself in a crazy final move and kind of make a ball of mozzarella and then twist it off So I'm tucking my, like, you're gonna have kind of a seam.
That looks pretty good.
No, it doesn't look very
No.
good. But who cares what it looks like?
What
All
does it
that's gonna
taste
matter
like?
is the taste.
I think
So,
this top part
we still
looks
have like
right.
pretty shiny, pretty smooth. It didn't suffer too much from being out.
Should it feel different now? Should it feel like mozz, or is it still too warm, kind of?
No, I think it should.
All right.
And then we'll dump it in there to just kind of finish
I
off.
think that looks great.
Let's see how yours is doing.
All right. You think the water is not hot enough right now?
Yeah, the water cooled down big time. So this is why it is nice to do things quickly at this stage, or
Yeah.
just like, you kind of just learn, you realize, and then you quickly develop an instinct for it.
Are you
Just roll
stretching
it up
while
like
you
a
roll
croissant.
it?
Not really. You could squeeze it a little bit, but I
Right.
mostly just want to roll it up.
So
Okay.
I have my croissant.
You got your croissant. Keep it in, keep it in.
This stretch move is hard. Would
This
you
is really
describe
hard.
this to someone who's never done it before?
It's almost like, the real trick is you're trying to take the outer layer of cheese and kind of stretch it over. Yeah, you got it, you got it. You're doing it.
This feels pretty good.
Yeah,
This feels right.
it's looking good. And then at the end, you're going to basically cinch it off.
I wasn't prepared for this part.
The thing is, you end up having a ton of respect for cheesemakers who make not only good tasting balls of mozzarella, but good looking balls. Yeah, whatever, don't look at the bottom.
The front looks good.
The front does look good. Let's see how it goes. This like bit of curd was just kind of sitting in here while we stretched everything else out.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you know, it's interesting to look at it. Like it's kind of shreddy. It's got like this kind of texture that's a little reminiscent of this. And so what you really can do at home is just start to like understand where's the moment when it becomes like the smoother, shinier thing.
Wow.
And then once you get like kind of like a memory, a visual memory and a memory of how it feels, then you'll be able to do it easier and easier.
Do you think that gentle pulling and the hot water, somewhere in there is the magic of where the curd becomes the
Yeah.
mozzarella?
The interesting thing too is that like you have to get the window right. You know what I mean? Like if you go overboard and your cheese starts to get sort of overstretched,
You can't bring it back.
there's not really any bringing it back.
So what do you do?
Try. You know, this is still good cheese. You can use it in different ways. Maybe you could cut it up, use this in like fresh grain salad, like let it cool. It can act a little bit closer to like a paneer type texture. Fresh curd is a little closer to feta in texture and kind of its crumbliness. With this one, you could mostly just like, I don't know, throw it in eggs, throw it in like an omelet or a frittata, anything where it kind of meld with the other flavors and it doesn't, people aren't like, why does that cheese look that way?
Right. We're done with this, right?
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, no, that was really fun.
The cheese spa. So in terms of storing it, I mean, you can leave it out in the brine
Right.
for the day.
Yeah.
And after that, you know, some people store it in the brine. It can get kind of like a slimy outside texture, which might not be ideal. And nothing's wrong with it. It just starts to kind of like feel the effects of the water. But if you're gonna store it in the fridge, I would store it like snugly, either in a container that's pretty snug, or you could put it in a little plastic bag.
So what they should be doing is eating it right away.
Yeah, here's hoping.
So for us, I got some tomatoes from the farmer's market, and we can make a little caprese salad,
Okay.
eat it right away. We have our tomatoes, basil, olive oil, a little salt and pepper. Before we make a caprese salad, let's taste just the mozzarella and
Yeah.
see how we did. This looks nice. Creaminess factor.
Yeah,
right?
I think
It
it's gonna be
looks-
very creamy.
There's some juiciness
You can see
happening
it.
there.
Okay.
So let's taste it just.
Okay. It's got the texture.
We could have been a little more aggressive with the salt while
Right.
we were stretching it, but that's one of those things where you make it once, you taste it, you learn,
Right.
and you do it again the next time. Elena, doesn't your family have some big caprese connection?
We love caprese. I mean, we eat it all the time. There was a long stretch of time where my sister, as a young person,
Hi, Lydia.
Hi, Lydia. She ate a caprese salad for breakfast before school.
It's badass.
Yeah. I mean, this is a perfect dish to showcase the skill and fun that you had stretching the mozzarella.
Right. Well, if you made a really nice mozzarella, you want to do as little to it as possible when you serve it, right? If you made sort of an okay mozzarella, you'll mix it in with something else and bake it in the oven or something.
That is sort of like the cheesemaker home cook's kind of trick. It's like, depending on how good the cheese was, then decide how you're going to be serving it to your guests.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
This looks so
All right,
good.
we did this.
I can't believe that this was cheese that we stretched.
Yeah, we stretched it. All right, here we go.
That's so good.
It's so good. I took a really big bite.
I learned a lot on this episode. If you had fun, if you learned a lot, click like, click subscribe, and we'll see you next time.